Hey everybody, welcome back to another Q&A. It is July 22nd, 2024. So we are over halfway through the year and time is flying, but we have some good questions for today. So let's dive right into them. First question, do you believe clen has muscle retention? I'm assuming muscle retention benefits or properties. And do you use steady or 2-on-1 off? So there may be some anti-catabolic properties, though in my opinion largely overplayed, and frankly the compound as a whole is kind of overrated in the sense that it's for the amount of benefit that you're going to get from it compared to the systemic stress that's probably going to come from that from long-term use or actually using a high enough dose to elicit a really heavy response is probably not going to be very good, so not a ton of ROI on that. It's an okay compound that can be beneficial at moderate dosages, really long half-life. It's going to disrupt sleep really easily the higher the dose gets, so realistically dosing it pretty low is probably going to be best option. 2-on-1 off, I don't really rotate those things, though I don't really utilize a high dose. However, I have found some benefit in taking days off here and there, especially on fatigue reduction days, refeed days. Really, because if you guys have heard me talk at all, I do a lot of fatigue reduction days that are not just increasing carbohydrates. So if you are utilizing those compounds, and it could be a case where I'd maybe remove those on certain days to further that fatigue reduction, along with like other stimulants or different things potentially. It's not necessarily a formal this many days on, this many days off rotation, if you will. Your thoughts on Kratom, or Kratom, I don't know how you guys like to pronounce that, and its potential benefits and or risks. And I'm not going to claim to be an expert on this compound specifically. I've done some research on it. I have worked with several people that have had addictions to this compound. It is addictive. It can be very addictive. The active kind of substrate, if you will, or whatever term you want to use, that's eliciting the effect that most people like, is acting on opiate receptors. So it's very similar in that regard, which is probably where a lot of its addictive properties come from. There's going to be benefits to that, I guess, in the sense that, you're going to feel something from that: pain reduction, probably less anxiety, mood stabilization, dose dependent as well. Like lower doses can be a little bit more uplifting, mood balancing. Higher doses can be have a little bit more of a sedative effect or a sedation effect. Yeah, it's definitely an addictive compound that's very real. Risk, take that for what you will. It's not something that I would probably recommend to people. Could it be used in moderation occasionally or with breaks? Yeah, it could, but it doesn't come without risk. So if it's something that someone is wanting to utilize on a regular, consistent basis, like a daily basis to get said benefits, then that's probably not the best option, because chance of addiction or dependency is going to become higher and higher, and tolerance is going to become more and more. Cardio in the off season question mark. So if you're asking, do I utilize cardio in the off season? I do, with a lot of people in various amounts, I would say with most people, really, whether that's a step goal, whether that's a actual walking goal. I do like to have some cardiovascular activity in there that does potentially raise heart rate a bit to get more of that cardiovascular benefit, even in situations of growth phases, calorie surpluses. I do think it's beneficial, especially for bigger people, bigger male bodybuilders and things like that as well, for additional cardiovascular benefit, better training performance, better endurance, things like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a super high amount of it. I do think that some people may potentially overdo it in the off season, and that could obviously cut into your calorie surplus or alter your calorie balance heavily. But it's also a stressor at some point. Now, like, walking is not stressful, but if you're someone that likes to get out there and do 15,000 steps a day and is a crazy maniac and wants to do tons and tons and tons of cardio in the off season, probably have some type of poor relationship with exercise and addiction to exercise or something of that nature, and something that's kind of underlying that, I'm not calling anyone out here, but just something that is causing you to feel like you have to do it in high amounts. But in reasonable amounts, it has a purpose, it has a utility. I think it can be great. So I'm all for it. What are the most common scenarios where you think a GI map is warranted? Let's say the most common scenario is probably one in which we've kind of done all the foundational things and we have a lot of overlapping side effects, multiple things going on. And while we have kind of corrected nutrition, corrected lifestyle, maybe implemented some baseline supplements for immune system, inflammation, mucosal lining, just basic stuff, and we're still seeing a lot of GI symptoms, that would be probably the most common time to use it, or the most probably beneficial time to use it. The opposite of that scenario would be someone that's jumping right to that, even though there's all of these other things that need fixed. Like I'd mentioned before, there's tons of stress. The diet, there's lacking nutritional diversity in the diet. That's probably hindering microbial diversity. There's not much going on there. They've been eating the same foods for a long time, really stressed, blah, 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 whatever it might be. Probably don't need to jump to something like that right away. So those two scenarios are almost polar opposites of one another, but that can kind of give you an idea of like when to do it and when to maybe not do it. It doesn't hurt to do it. You can always do it earlier in that process if you need that data and you have the budget, as long as you're not going to be hell-bent on what that test says exactly, because there's going to be a lot of things that affect it, and you have to understand that when you're reading it and trying to interpret it. Can you explain high days on a prep and why do you do them? Do you calculate how many? So this is kind of very broad question, but if we're talking about like refeeding days, I actually taught an entire class on this and refeeding and fatigue management and all that stuff. So I'm going to plug it because why not? It's my channel. So you can go into the link tree in my bio on my Facebook and my Instagram, and that is available in the education marketplace. So there is a class in there that teaches all this stuff in detail. With that being said, I personally may do something like a training and non-training day rotation. Typically, sometimes I even just use static macros with people, or static nutrition, diet plan, whatever it might be. I'm generally not someone that programs in high days in a regular rotation, like high days that are far and above like a training day macro setup. I'm using those a lot more by feel. When I'm doing them, I'm going to give you just some very general things, and I don't want you to think this applies to everyone, because it does not. What we're trying to do is we're really just trying to get someone out of a deficit. We're trying to help manage fatigue and potentially balance neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, also hormonally looking at maybe increasing thyroid hormone conversion a little bit, albeit it's not going to be a ton, managing cortisol because of the increase in insulin. But these days don't need to be a ton of food for a lot of people. Now there are instances where we might need to do that more for people that are very, very depleted, but it's not like we need to raise the food or double it or do time and a half even for a lot of people. We really just kind of need to get close to maintenance, a little bit above maintenance. You're probably going to use mostly carbohydrates in most cases. And then you can also factor in some other fatigue reduction via like reducing cardio, eliminating cardio, doing this on non-training days, stuff like that. So it's not like you need to just all of a sudden add in, 600 grams of carbs. Like some people maybe, but a lot of people it's probably not that necessary. How important are maintenance phases between push and fat loss phases and average duration? I would say they vary in importance. I do use them. So a couple examples, like one example might be if the person's a PD user, you're probably not going to want to be like peak, androgen, peak food, and then all of a sudden drop everything all at the same time. It's probably not a great environment for muscle retention. So maybe you would have to run some sort of a maintenance phase where you're letting hormones stabilize down a little bit, maybe bring food down a little bit to ease some of that strain on the digestive tract. That's kind of your maintenance phase for 2, 4, maybe 6 weeks, maybe even longer if their body composition is still okay before you drop into that fat loss phase. So that would probably be like a common scenario that you would use it. And you could even do that for non-enhanced people as well. If they're having a hard time pushing the food any further from a digestive standpoint, but their body composition is still pretty good, they're not too insulin resistant, you can you can maintain, you could even drop the food slightly to decrease a little bit of that strain on the digestive tract and just chill there for a bit, solidify, drop. But again, 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks maybe, depending on how much their body composition holds up, because at some point you're just going to get too fat and you need to drop down anyhow. One more. What is the best way to manage stress, sleep, and fatigue while in a growth phase? I'm going to be honest, that's probably too broad to answer on here. I mean, that's like a whole podcast. That's probably like a 45 to 60 minute discussion. I will say this, I mean, it's the same stuff that you're going to do in a fat loss phase, except for your recovery capacity is probably going to be a little bit higher because you have more body fat, more food, maybe doing less activity from a cardio standpoint at least. You know, it's largely the same stuff. Sleep hygiene, set sleep and wake times, good meal patterns for circadian rhythm, pulling back on training when you need to, understanding how much you can handle when you need to pull back. I mean, there's so much to pick apart in this. I mean, this is like all of coaching right here. This is most of what coaching is. So I wouldn't be able to give you like a 2 to 4 minute answer on that, unfortunately. But if you ever want to do a consultation or check out some of the podcasts that I have on stuff like this, feel free to hit me up. But that's it for today, guys. I appreciate the questions, and we'll see y'all next time.